We see a world where there is a renewed emphasis on beauty, nature, creativity, art, and aesthetics.
By now, those of you who are readers of the Press Democrat, and those of you who know Reverend Tara Steele, one of our ministers, she is our Wednesday evening service coordinator. By now you know that she was recently rescued from the John Muir Trail where she had been hiking. So let me say right away that she's fine. And I talked to her on Friday. So here's the story. She was on probably, I would say, the longest hike that she's ever been on in her life at a very high altitude. I think it was 8,000 feet or something. And she had a minor stroke. And when she became aware of what was happening, she activated her personal location beacon device. You know, it's a device that emits signals to rescue agencies who are monitoring it for just that thing. So she was eventually picked up by the California Highway Patrol helicopter rescue team in quite a heroic and dramatic extraction, and they lifted her up through a small clearing that Reverend Tara says was no more than 3/10 wide. So I spoke to her on the phone, and she said she is looking forward to telling you the whole story. Because she's scheduled to speak on a Wednesday evening coming up, September 14th. And she said to me, do you know, Edward, that the topics for Wednesday evening are set long in advance? And do you know what mine is for that Wednesday? Can you imagine? Her topic is help, thanks, wow. So she doesn't have to prepare anything. Isn't that something? She's going to be able to share her entire experience with us as well. I'm hoping the video, because it was all captured by one of the team members, and it's quite extraordinary. And we have a card outside for her under the giant monitor, the big monitor outside. If you want to send her a love note, you can do that as well. Now, the video, when I watched it, it reminded me of our topic today. Generosity of spirit as it came through the rescue team members and the other random hiking people on the path. And as much as I would like to talk about it, I have to leave it up to Reverend Tara to tell you the whole story. And it's spectacular. So she'll be here on that upcoming Wednesday. And our topic, generosity of spirit, is based on a statement that comes from our teaching. And the statement says, we believe in the eternal givingness of life to all. Now, when we use the word life and we make it a capital letter life, what we're talking about, well, it's a synonym for divinity. That's what we're talking about. So when we say life, we mean spiritual reality, or the truth of our being, or God. That's what we mean. And we've got this idea that this big picture, this life, is one unity that is constantly pouring itself into expression in an endless variety of ways, showing up as you, as me, as animals, as helicopters, as history, as imagination, and we call all of that creation. And we think of it as holy. And we say that this creation is creating endlessly. It never ends. In fact, it never started. It's a continuum. It just goes on and on and on. And there's no end to the numbers of ways that it can take expression or take form. And we call that abundance. And over the past several weeks, you've probably heard me say that spiritual living is all about duplicating the nature of the divine in my own life, in my human life, bringing it into expression in my human life. And we have this idea that the more we bring that into being, the more we duplicate the nature of the divine in our private, personal, human lives, the more we experience lives that are meaningful, powerful, connected, loving. So how do we bring eternal givingness of life to all into expression in our own lives? Well, I propose we do that by focusing on its human form, generosity of spirit. Because there is nothing like generosity of spirit. Nothing, I think, can bring beauty into expression like generosity of spirit. It is magical. Now, generosity of spirit is a state of mind. It's more than an act. It's an attitude towards life. It's the ongoing tendency to contribute to life. It is the consistent tendency to give to others. It's the tendency to help wherever possible. Actually, I think tendency is the wrong word. It's an identity. You see, because you and I can learn the skill of helping, we can learn the skill of giving, and when we learn that skill and we do it, we get more out of life, and we continue to get more out of life as long as we do it. But there comes a point where the skill, the practice, becomes the person's identity. In other words, I've practiced it so much that I don't have to think about it. It's not a choice anymore. It's not a tendency. It's who I am. So a person who has generosity of spirit tends to express generosity for no reason whatsoever other than that it is their nature. It's like a calling. It's like breathing. And it's a nature that any one of us can develop. I think we develop it by studying how people with generosity of spirit show up. How do they think about the world? I've noticed that a person with generosity of spirit looks at life as if it is an ongoing opportunity to contribute and not an opportunity to get. That's the difference. You know, when I was growing up, we had a neighbor a few houses down. She was a lovely lady. She was an attractive lady. But you know, she had a tremendous difficulty connecting with other people, making friends, getting along with the neighbors, getting invited to events. And I think it was because she had this atmosphere of getting around her. It was very subtle. You know, she seemed to be focused on what she could get from you, what answers she could get, what favor she could get. And so it made people feel uneasy around her. It was very odd. She seemed to be focused on how she could benefit. You know, it kind of reminded me about the difference between the way my dog and my cat receive. You know, my dog is just so grateful for anything. Not so much with the cat. He's entitled. In fact, he's a taker. And when he's done, he's done. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that next week, how to become a generous receiver. But for now, let me talk about people with generosity of spirit, because I've noticed that a person with generosity of spirit takes responsibility for their own existence. They're less likely to blame or criticize. They're the type of people who roll up their sleeves and do what is needed to be done. They don't wait for other people to do it. That's what that song was about that we heard earlier on. It was composed by John McCutcheon, and it gives us the story of an example of a person who has generosity of spirit. a person who takes responsibility to find a way to contribute, even if circumstances are very, very difficult. And the song is called The Streets of Sarajevo. It tells the story of the now famous cellist of Sarajevo, Vedran Smailovic. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. And his story goes something like this. It was 1992 when Sarajevo was besieged, by the Yugoslavian People's Army. It was, I think, over 1,000 days in the Bosnian War, and I think 100,000 people are said to have lost their life in that war. And Vedran would go out every day and with his cello into ruined buildings that had been bombed and play. Because he refused to stop expressing beauty because a war was happening. Even the opera house where he used to play, after it was destroyed, even after 22 of his neighbors and friends were killed while standing in line at the only bakery that had the material to bake breads and give it away to people who were starving, even after that, he would go out every single day and offer his music as a prayer. He played in ruins. He played on bomb sites. He played at grave sites. He played at funerals, even though he was warned over and over again that doing so was very, very dangerous because of the snipers and the threat of other bombing. See, people who have generosity of spirit, they roll up their sleeves and they do what they can without waiting for other people to do it. You see, they're looking more at what can they put into life rather than what can they get out of life. When I was fairly new in this teaching, I was living in Los Angeles and I was serving on the World Ministry of Prayer. It's a phone bank where people all over the world can call in and receive affirmative prayer in the style of our tradition. And it was in 1992, the same year as the Bosnian War, when the Los Angeles riots broke out. And there was looting and rioting downtown Los Angeles, and the crowds were moving in the direction of where the World Ministry of Prayer building was. We were right in the line of the advancing riots. And so the decision was made to evacuate for safety and close the World Ministry of Prayer. And I remember after that sitting with a friend at home, and we were talking about it and said, this can't be right. I mean, the one place that should stay open, shouldn't it be the World Ministry of Prayer? So we got ourselves together and we decided we were going to open the building, and we drove downtown straight in the direction of the riots, and we opened the building and we turned on the phones and we staffed the lines, and I was feeling so good about that, pretty proud of myself. You know, I was telling myself, this is what the people need. It's awesome. And the calls started, the calls for prayer. They came pouring in and they didn't stop. Here's the thing. No one was calling about the riots, and no one was calling about Sarajevo. The calls that came in were about everyday, ordinary things. I've lost my job. I've lost my way. I've lost my faith. I've lost my relationship. I've lost my health. And I remember as those first calls came in, feeling a little disappointed. I remember thinking to myself, you know, there's rioting going on in the city. There's war in the world. And you're bothered about your relationship? See, I got a little judgmental. But in a moment, I came back to my senses and I remembered what I had been taught about the eternal givingness of life, which gives without prejudice, regardless of the person's state of mind, color of skin, social status, anything. And I remembered wait, I had been taught to respect people exactly where they are at and not where I think they should be. And I remembered I had been taught to pray not because there was a perfect request, but because it was my nature to do so. And when I remembered that, I shifted, and so we prayed for whatever was asked without prejudice. Oh, it was such an important shift because, do you see, I came back to my spiritual nature in that moment. And people who have generosity of spirit, they contribute in this way because it is their nature to do so, and their giving is not affected by how the world receives it or whether or not the world deserves it. There is a website, the Heart, Spirit, Mind website, and on it says, "A person of generous spirit takes complete responsibility for their lives. They do not blame others or circumstances for their problems. They step up and do the right thing, even when it may be fraught with fear and conflict." Who among you watches the Great British Bake Off? 1, Don and I, 2, 3. It's this great reality show where people bake. They get recipes they have to bake, so one has to leave the show every week until the star. Nobody. It's fantastic. Anyway, the most recent series just concluded, and the winner, the star baker, was announced. It's Nadia Hussein, a Muslim lady. And in an interview on the BBC Radio 4, she described the anti-Islamic abuse that she still experiences daily. She told how it's become a part of her life. She's routinely pushed, shoved on the bus, verbally abused because she's a Muslim. And she said that the abuse has made her even more determined to be a good role model for her 3 children and to the Muslim community in England. People with generosity of spirit are typically not revengeful. And their giving nature is not affected by adverse conditions or bad behavior around them. Here's what she said in the interview. "I love being British, and I love living here. This is my home, and it always will be, regardless of all the other things that define me. And I want my children to be proud of that. And I don't want them to grow up with a chip on their shoulder. So I live as positively as I can." And she said she wanted to show her children that it is possible to rise up above the bad behavior, even if it's all around them, that it's possible to choose the better response, that it's possible to live with dignity and be proud of who you are. And as a result of her attitude, her role modeling, millions of people all over are witnessing this and being inspired. And that's what happens when you and I live in close contact with our generous nature. We inspire people into forgiveness, into hope, into resiliency, into tolerance. That's what happens. Beauty erupts. I have noticed that people with generosity of spirit tend to be optimistic and happy, not because they're stupid or deluded or in denial. No, because their generous spirit puts them in close personal contact with that within them which is like the divine nature. And that is what releases all kinds of joy. People who know me know that I'm a bit of a joker, a little bit of a prankster spirit in me, you know. I love to make people laugh. I get it from my father. Oh, he was my role model for that, you know. He was a tremendously generous soul. Now, he wasn't materially wealthy. And you know, if he had material stuff, he would have given it all away. I'm sure. And so because he didn't have material wealth to share, he shared what he had. He shared his joy, and he was committed to it. And he shared it indiscriminately, without prejudice to anyone. And it wasn't an easy commitment, because his life was hard. Many people who know me also know that my brother's birth was complicated, ending in brain damage because of lack of oxygen, making it a very difficult thing to raise him at home, which we did. You know, not a day passed that didn't test my father's patience. And I remember when he made the decision with the family that we were going to keep my brother at home and care for him at home, I remember people saying, "Oh, we admire the sacrifice." But I don't think my father saw it as a sacrifice. I don't think he experienced any loss of freedom. I don't think he even thought of it as a parental duty. He certainly didn't think of it as a burden. I think he did it because it was his nature. And he saw it as an opportunity to express his nature, to give, to help, to nurture. And the stress of it all was never able to take away his joy. You know, according to spiritual law of reciprocity, you know, what goes around comes around. Everyone who knew my father, and I don't think I'm exaggerating, everyone who knew him loved him. And I think it's because they were able to feel safe around him. They could open up around him because he had an atmosphere that he didn't want anything from you other than you to feel your joy. He wasn't trying to get anything from anyone. I think my father found God in generosity. I've noticed that people with generosity of spirit are easy to be around. Imagine a world in which you are in touch with your generous heart, and you're letting it inspire you to roll up your sleeves and do what needs to be done. And you're letting it guide you into being happy and optimistic. And as a result, you can see in your mind's eye, imagine how easy it is to be with you. And if you do that, if you imagine that, you'll be imagining a world in which you are living in alignment with your natural-born spiritual nature. I propose that if you take the time to look inside, you will find that there. That urge that wants to birth beauty and love, that wants to give. It's natural. It's there. It waits. And I invite you this week to look around, to notice opportunities where you can bring it into expression. I can think of ways. Maybe it means listening a little more, appreciating a little more, helping a little more, giving a little more. forgiving a little more, forgetting a little more, nurturing. And it's the sort of thing it's great to practice with other people and also great to practice with ourselves.